So thank you all for joining the launch of Fairlight Moderns 2021. So today, as you all know, we're here to celebrate the publication of 4 brilliant novellas. So we've got Blue Postcards by Douglas Bruton and Taking Flight by J.T. Torres, which published on the 8th of July this year. And we've also got Only About Love by Debbi Voisey and Missing Words by Loree Westron, which actually published today. So happy publication day to you both. And these 4 novellas are joining our beautiful Fairlight Modern series of short fictions from around the world, which launched in 2018. So today, to chair the event, we have Emma Timpany, who is the author of the Fairlight Moderns novella Travelling in the Dark, which won the Hall and Woodhouse DLF Writing Prize in 2019. So Emma was born in Dunedin, New Zealand, and now resides in Cornwall. Her 2015 short story collection, The Lost of Syros, was longlisted for the 2016 Edgehill Prize, and she is co-editor of the 2018 short story anthology, Cornish Short Stories, a collection of contemporary Cornish writing. Her stories have won competitions, including the Society of Authors Tom Gallen Trust Award, and have been published in the literary journals in England, New Zealand, and Australia. So we're very lucky to have her here today. Welcome, Emma. Thank you for chairing the event, and I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Denny. I feel really honoured actually to be asked to do this event and to welcome these new stories to the Fairlight Modern series. When I realised all the 3 or 4 years ago that I'd written a novella, I thought I would never find a publisher who would take it on. And I was absolutely delighted when Fairlight Books took it on, and then there's this whole series that is still going. I think it's a small but beautiful form, and I'd just like to thank everyone at Fairlight for their support over the years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each writer of the new moderns, the 2021 moderns. They're 4 wonderful books. I've been reading them over the last 2 weeks, and I've gone all sorts of amazing places reading these wonderful books. And I'm going to go through each author one by one, tell you a bit about them, and then they're going to read, tell us a bit about their books, and they're going to read an excerpt from their novellas for you. So first up, we're going alphabetically. So the first writer I'd like to introduce is Douglas Bruton. Douglas has had work appear in various publications, including Northwards Now, Ascetica, the Irish Literary Review, and New Writing Scotland. His stories have won many competitions, including the Fish and Neil Gunn prizes. He's already had 3 novels published: The Chess Piece Musician, Mrs. Winchester's Gun Club, and now the wonderful Blue Postcards. So Douglas, I'd just like to hand over to you and very much look forward to your reading.
So Blue Postcards is written as a kind of series of 500 paragraphs or 500 postcards, and they all have something blue in them. The book itself juggles 3 narrative strands, and the postcards or paragraphs are numbered, and hopefully this makes the juggling both visible and easy to follow. The strands of the narrative weave into and out of each other and are connected, and one of the connections is blue, and one of the other connections is truth and lies, and there are various others. And I've chosen to read from the very start of the novel, and it seems to me, in this case, to make most sense. So I'm going to read the first 7 paragraphs or postcards. I'm not going to read the numbers, but if you were to read them in print form, you'd be able to see that there's a kind of juggling going on, and hopefully the first paragraph that I read will make clear why that is.
This meeting is image. This leave meeting. Continue. Default now in.
At the foot of the steps of Le Passage de la Sorcière in Montmartre sits a man in a blue suit, the sleeves of his jacket pushed up to his elbows, his shirt collar unfastened, and his blue tie loose around his neck. He sits playing with 3 chased silver egg cups and a wooden ball the size of a pea. He asks passers-by if they would like to bet on which egg cup the ball is under, after he does a dance of the cups, shifting the order and showing the wooden ball and then not showing it. It is a trick, of course, but he does it so well it's hard to see how. Once I saw him lift all 3 cups and there was no ball at all. It had disappeared. He's a showman and he makes everything look easy. He feigns surprise when the ball is not where it should be, and he laughs, showing gaps in his yellow teeth when he does, and one tooth has a blue stone fixed in it. Maybe he doesn't sit there now. Maybe he has disappeared, for there are gendarmes in blue-black uniforms and pillbox hats, and they move people along if they are causing a disturbance. Years ago, in the blue mists of memory, there was a street in Paris called the Street of Tailors. Men sat outside their shops like kings on their thrones, and they nodded to each other or tipped their broad-brimmed hats and said shalom and smiled. There were also dressmakers on that street and gentlemen's outfitters and cloth merchants. Then one day, the whole street disappeared and all the people in it. Now that street has a different name, though there is a tailor there and he wears a shawl some days, fringed with tassels. 4 of the tassels each have, according to the law written in his book, a blue thread running through them. The man's name is Henri, and he works in the shop, taking down the measurements of men's inside legs and the width of their shoulders and the thickness of their waists. He writes all these measurements down in a leather-bound ledger that is kept locked in a safe, as though it is a book of secrets. I remember standing at a stall beside the Eiffel Tower. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at it. I stopped by the stall because it offered shade from an awning that stretched above 3 fold-down tables. On one table, there were boxes of postcards in some sort of arrangement. They were old postcards, pictures of Paris over the years. I leafed through them idly in order to justify my sheltering. One card caught my eye. It was a blue postcard, completely blue on one side, a blank and eternal blue, though the paper was a little yellowed and cracked and the corners of the card rounded. On the reverse side, on the left, the postcard had a message in French. On the right, a name and address. It carried a stamp in the top right-hand corner, a stamp that was completely blue. It had been franked and was dated 14 May 1957. I do not think the girl serving at the stall knew what she had. It was priced at €1. And that's the end of my reading.
Oh, thank you so much, Douglas. You read that absolutely beautifully. And I noticed it's very strange when you were holding up your paper to read from it. It looked blue to me. I don't know if anyone else saw that, but it seemed to be a blue colour on. I don't know if it's just the reflection from the computer, but it looked amazing, and it was a wonderful reading. And it's an incredible book. And I'm going to be asking you some questions about that later, which I really look forward to. And I don't know how you did it, Douglas. I'm very jealous. So we can ask you more about that in a bit. But for now, we're just going to move on to JT Torres, who's written another one in the series, which is Taking Flight. And he's going to tell us some more about his book now and read from it for us. So I'd just like to introduce JT. JT Torres was born in Miami, Florida, into a family of Cuban immigrants who forbade him to travel to Cuba. He spent much of his life moving away from Cuba, traveling north for an MFA and a PhD. Eventually, he reached Alaska. Somehow, in the subarctic, he found passage to Cuba. Since then, he has spent 2 years traveling to and writing about the once forbidden island. JT, I'm delighted to welcome you to tell us some more about your book and to read from it.
Thank you so much, Emma, and I am also delighted to be here. So first and foremost, thank you, both Fairlight and everybody who's here for making this event happen. When I first started writing this book, which started as a life history of my real life grandmother, and also performing some ethnography, and I interviewed other people living in diaspora, primarily from Caribbean countries. And in writing this book, I did not think anybody would actually read it. So this is still very surreal. So thank you. So yes, this book did come out of, or the story came out of this project that I was doing that was meant to be nonfiction, meant to be ethnographic and partially biographical. But the stories that I was collecting, largely from my grandmother and others, were filled with pretty magical, what we would think of as magical, fantastical elements. Some stories were disputed by other storytellers, such as, my mom would tell me that my grandmother was lying to me in many of her stories. And then the questions of truth started to become very important and interesting to me in a very absurd, even humorous way. I found it quite funny, the stories that my grandmother would tell that would make other family members upset in terms of their supposed veracity. So I took off running in that direction with that brand of storytelling that really pushes those boundaries of truth. And the story just ventured into fiction where, names are fictional characters. I mean, they are fictional characters now. They're living and breathing as their own. And I just focused on the novella as a form that would allow me to really dive into these vignettes and images, this collage of an immigrant identity and the confusions and the absurdities that go along with it. So I will read pretty early on in the novella what I think gives the best introduction to the primary character, who is Nana. She's not the protagonist. The protagonist is a young boy, her grandson, but it's very much about this shared heritage of never really knowing what home is. Okay. It had been several years since Nana came to America from Cuba, but she never assimilated. She refused, referring to herself as an exile. No soy ciudadano, she would protest. America is where exiles live. She didn't make any friends. She never kept a job longer than a month, mostly because she told her bosses that she was not an American citizen, even though she actually was. And after my grandfather died, I was told, Nana needed a lot more attention. This presented a problem for me, a love-starved child. And so my mother had the idea of getting Nana a pet, but Nana never wanted a pet. So it worried my mother whether she'd actually take care of one. With that worry in mind, she decided on a more disposable animal because pets are measured on a life value scale. Parents never start kids off, for example, with a dog, which ranks high. They get their potentially irresponsible children an ant farm, a goldfish, or a hamster, a more appropriate species for a child to accidentally murder. A parakeet, my mother's choice, also ranks low on this life value scale. In my earliest memories of my relationship with Nana, I felt directly threatened by her. I also hoped the parakeet would work. When we brought Nana her new pet, a neon dart and a silver wired cage, my mother explained that until school started in September, she would be very busy watching me and working for my father. I remember my mother holding me against her chest while she said this. I remember how her grip tightened, squeezed fear into my thigh. While I might not have been able to fathom the gravity of their conversation, I do remember the discomfort of her grasp and of Nana's sharp stare at both me and my mother. He's too big for you to carry him, Nana said. Put him down. You used to carry me home from school when I was 8, embarrassing me in front of my friends and teachers. You didn't listen to Dada when he told you to put me down. That was in Cuba, Nana said. Things are different in America. My mother always remarked how Nana was stubborn as a rock. Sometime during her 50s, Nana had a dentist remove all of her teeth because she didn't want to pay for a filling. My mother used to tell everyone that Nana's stubbornness is greater than pain. At the time, I was scared of Nana, scared that she was mad at me for something I didn't understand. When she talked about me to my mother, her voice cut. I bet he loves spending the day with you all the time, she said once. She walked around in platform shoes that made her taller than my mother, and my father for that matter. Each step she took had the thunderous quality of crashing waves. I remember Nana as the savage queen of a verdant jungle. She lived in an apartment with brown walls, mulch-colored furniture, and rows of plants, dirt and several petals spilled from flower pots. It was where an exile would live. You don't try to make friends here, my mother finally said and walked towards the front door. My friends are in Cuba. Nana stopped a foot down. The earth trembled. The parakeet flew to the cage's ceiling. The plants rocked in their pots, and a few white petals floated to the floor. My mother squeezed me. I had never been to Cuba, where Nana was born. My parents had been there a number of times, but never spoke much about it. I imagined it looked just like Florida, but with mountains. Here in Florida, Nana was the only mountain. You've lived in Miami for 20 years now. My mother put me down and we walked to the car. As she loaded me in my car seat, I looked towards the apartment and saw Nana leaning on the railing, watching us. The shadow of her figure split the sun's light, and from inside the car, I could feel her loneliness. Nana named the parakeet Pepe, but that was all she did. Pepe was lime green with chalk blue circles around his eyes. When he lifted his white-tipped wings, he revealed yellow shadows on each side of his body. During our visits, I'd stare through the thin wires of the cage and watch the bird bolt from corner to corner. I so badly wanted to hold Pepe, but feared Nana would yell at me to put him down. Once, when I was certain my mother and Nana were having coffee in the kitchen, out of view of the living room where the cage was, I slid my pinky through the individual wires and nudged Pepe. His feathers felt firm but flimsy, like they'd break apart into individual fibers and brittle bones. He had a certain edge, despite how fragile he appeared to be. When I nudged him a second time, he turned around and pecked me. I hollered, and when I noticed a drop of blood, I cried. My mother came running and scooped me into her arms. She took me into the kitchen and held a tissue over my injured pinky. Nana stared at me with a look as sharp as Pepe's beak, a look that I would later learn to identify as judgment. She said, "Don't poke around where you don't belong." When my mother and I showed up one week, several days after my pinky had healed, we found Nana crying on the sandstone patterned sofa. Pepe was lying on his side on the wicker coffee table, his eyes closed and body motionless. "Oh my God," my mother said and ran to Nana. She sat next to her and pulled Nana's face into the space between her neck and shoulder, shielding her eyes. I stood by the front door. Nana's apartment felt damp and cold. The air chilled my skin sweat. The apartment seemed to have become a much more dangerous place since the last visit. It was like I could sense predators lurking in the plants, hunting me from the hallway. Growing up in Florida, I would learn from school field trips to the Everglades to stand still if facing a black bear, run in zigzags if chased by an alligator, and avoid eye contact with a panther. What they never taught us was how to flee a wild grandmother. "He stopped moving after I bathed him," Nana said, sobbing with her hands in her lap, her fingers locked and her face buried in my mother's neck. "You bathed him?" The compassion in my mother's voice gave way to anger. "You don't bathe birds. He smelled bad. He's dead." My mother stood up from the sofa and went into the kitchen. She came back with a roll of paper towels and used them to wrap Pepe like a bird mummy. Then she carried him back into the kitchen. Nana's eyes were red and swollen. She looked much more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Without her false teeth to prop up her lips, her mouth drooped onto her chin. She looked at me and I felt her sadness. As a child, I did not know what that feeling was, but it felt familiar, like I was supposed to know it. "You don't bathe birds, Mom. I mean, that's common sense. You always scold me like I'm a child." My mother walked back into the living room with a long sigh, creating her own gust of wind. She told Nana to put on her shoes. "I can't leave you alone now." The sadness I sensed in Nana disappeared with a literal blink of the eye. It happened fast, without my mother noticing. And so we brought Nana back with us to our house, where she watched TV in the living room while my mother punched tax codes into the computer in her office. I crawled onto an empty shelf in one of the metal storage cabinets in the hallway, and from there spied on Nana. She seemed oblivious to the images flashing across the TV screen. Whenever the sound of laughter came from the speakers, she kept a stern expression, silent. All I could think about was Pepe. What had my mother done with his body? Did Nana kill him? Would Nana kill me? Pepe wasn't safe in a cage. Was I safe in a cabinet? And that's it.
Thank you so much, J2. That's an absolutely amazing reading. And it just gives such a sense of this incredible character of Nana, you know, she's so powerful and really quite scary, isn't she? And for a young child, I mean, goodness me, it's just wonderful. And, you know, really looking forward to talking more about your book, which I so enjoyed reading when we come to the Q&A. So thank you very much, J2. It was great.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next reader we've got is Debbi Voisey, whose book was published today. So exciting, Debbi. And Debbi's novella is called Only About Love. It's her first published book, although she's had short stories and flash fiction printed in several anthologies, online and in print. Debbi runs online creative writing workshops and writing courses, as well as mentoring one-to-one with writers at all levels and abilities. Later this year, we'll see the publication of her second novella in flash, The 1025, and that's been published by Flash, the International Short Story Press. And actually tonight is a double celebration for Debbi, because it's her 32nd wedding anniversary. So huge congratulations to Debbi. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Emma. It's really exciting. Thank you everybody for coming along tonight. This novella and Flash was written when I realised I had several flash fictions written around the same subject when my father was ill and when he passed away. And this is a fictional story of a family not dissimilar to mine, although the names have been changed to protect the innocents. And this is, I want to read three short chapters from it. One from the beginning when Frank meets his wife, one from the middle when he's with his children, and one from towards the end. So this first one is called The Future. Her fingers were cold. He squeezed them tighter in his big palm. They were lost in there. It made him feel good, her protector. Not that she needed protecting from what he'd seen of her so far. Fierce she was. When he told her he didn't dance, she told him she would see her dance partner Donald twice a week, and when they were at the Majestic on Fridays and dancing non-stop, he wasn't to get jealous and start doing any of that macho nonsense. Okay, Liz, he'd said, incapable of any more words, incapable of feeling anything except a thudding heart, which meant the start of something, even though he didn't know what. He took her to the cafe where everyone met before going to the dance halls. Choruses of, "Hey, Frank," and "Frankie, my boy," and "Frank, darling." And Liz let it all happen, sat quietly, smoothing her skirt. Classy. But when he came back with their coffees and put them down on the table, she let her hand cover his, stilling him for a second, and said, "I mean it, I don't put up with nonsense." It was implicit that she meant the women who were batting their eyelashes, swooning over his film star looks, the groupies who hung back after his gigs. She made him want to be better. She saw past the dark shadows of his dad, the scars he'd etched in him. "You'll never be good enough" was now looking like it could be a lie. Was it? Could he pull this off, this relationship thing? He could see the future stretching out before him like a never-ending ribbon of time, and he wondered, for the first time, if he could navigate it and make it to the end, and be happy along the way. Liz sipped her coffee, her pale blue eyes holding his gaze steadily. He knew she would always be the strongest of the two of them. So that's when he meets his wife, Liz. The second one is called Not All Heroes Wear Capes. Today, Frank's showing Dawn and John how to be superheroes. He'd caught John that morning as he went to call him for breakfast, hiding under his blankets, and he could see a torchlight shining under there. There was a circle like the Mysterons from Captain Scarlet penetrating through. He crept into the room slowly, stifling a laugh. Then he bipped John on top of his head, eliciting giggles. "What you reading, sport?" he'd asked, and John had made him sit for 5 minutes while he showed him what Superman was up to that week. "You know you don't have to hide under the covers with a torch, don't you?" Frank asked. "It's morning, it's light out." He pulled open the curtains, proving it. "I know, Dad, but Superman likes danger. Do you like danger?" Frank hadn't known how to answer that. He didn't think he liked danger, but for a while now, behind Liz's back, he'd been doing some pretty dangerous things. Now, in the back garden with both John and Dawn, he fastens their matching anoraks using just the one top button. As he adjusts their hoods, his face is right up against theirs. Both have jam around their mouths. Both have the widest, bluest eyes. Both have snotty noses and hot breath, and he imagines their little hearts beating inside their chest. He closes his eyes and wants to hold on to this feeling that their hearts are all intact, even as he realizes he'll probably break them both in two. "Don't put your arms in. This is a superhero's cape," he tells them, and his voice is thick. "Where's yours, Daddy?" Dawn asks him, blinking the long eyelashes he'd first seen when she was seconds old. She'll never need fake lashes when she's older. He feels a cold hand clutches it at his heart, compress his chest. It's like the draft from those batting lashes has knocked him over. "I don't need one. Only superheroes need them. That's what you two are. You can do anything. You're both amazing." "But you are a superhero, Daddy." Dawn smiles and finds his hand with her little one, sticky with something, but he doesn't care. You're our hero. He wants to reply. He wants to tell them they shouldn't look up to a man like him, a weak man. But he doesn't, because being strong in their eyes is all he has left. And finally, towards the end, the title chapter, Only About Love. When you shave him, he moves his mouth and face around like he's chewing an invisible sweet. He offers up his neck with absolute trust. You glide the blade down beneath his chin and over his Adam's apple. It's massive, like he swallowed a rock. You hear the rasp of his stubble, and it's almost like the noise is coming from you, because there's sandpaper inside you. Your stomach is made of it. Your heart is made of it. Your throat. Your insides have been transformed into a million tiny pieces of rock. He can no longer speak, but words are unnecessary. Life is now simple in its cruelty. He once cared for you, and now you're caring for him. Each touch of your fingers on his skin reminds him that love still exists. You want all his waking thoughts from now on to be only about love. Thank you.
Oh, Debbi, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. And I'm very glad that you read that last piece as well, which is so much at the centre of the book. It's wonderful and interesting about novella and flesh coming at this life over a lifetime from so many different angles. It's really, we'll talk about that some more later. And I've just got to say, I'm really enjoying hearing all the writers reading their work, because when you read as a reader, you hear a voice in your head, or I do anyway, and I hear the book, but hearing you read them again yourselves, you just find different things in them as well. It's just really great. So thank you all for reading. And now I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Loree, whose book Missing Words is also published today. And Loree Westron is an American writer who now lives in Portsmouth. She's previously worked at the local Royal Mail sorting office, an experience that influenced her novella Missing Words. Loree has a MA and PhD in creative writing from Chichester University. Her short stories have placed highly in competitions, including the Fish Prize and the V.S. Pritchett Memorial Prize. Her writing has been published in journals and anthologies, including the London Magazine. And Missing Words is her debut novella. And a great big welcome to Loree to read from her work.
Hi, well, thank you very much. I just want to say I've read all three of the other novellas, and they are fabulous. And I feel really, honored to have mine among them. This section that I'm going to read from is from the early part of the book, and it's introducing the postcard that plays a central role. The character works at Royal Mail sorting office here in Portsmouth, and anyway, I shall continue. Okay. It is a typical beach scene. Blue sky, white sands, leaning palms. One of the perks of sorting mail is looking at postcards from other people's holidays. Jenny glances at the card, then lays it picture side up on the bench where her mind can wander through it as she works. Postcards from beach holidays, though, are meager inspiration, and she longs for a more engaging view to come along. Sunrise behind the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, Icelandic geysers shooting skywards, a mule train picking its way down the side of the Grand Canyon. Her favorite card so far this summer has been from a girl who called herself Miracle. The picture was of a sand-colored temple surrounded by shorn-headed boys in saffron robes, and Miracle, so she wrote, had found tranquility. When her bench is cleared again, Jenny upends a fresh box of letters and spreads its contents in front of the wooden frame. She grabs a handful of the envelopes and, clutching them close to her chest, she begins sorting once more. Her right hand plucks crisp endearments and telecom bills from her left and casts them into pigeonholes marked Preston and Leeds and Plymouth and York in smooth, sharp, continuous strokes. 2 minutes for each clutch of letters, 20 for each box, 1,500 letters an hour. It takes her 15 minutes to cycle to work each morning, and another 5 to weave her way past the receiving bays and dispatch bays in the cavernous hall beneath the building before climbing the steps to the sorting room floor. For 5 years, she has been the only woman to stick with the job and the only woman in the building outside of the canteen and offices upstairs. Swiftly, she works her way through each box of letters, the local pigeonholes filling up fast. Milton, Hilsey, Southsea, Cosham. On occasion, there are still catcalls from the men, but she has grown used to their banter and deaf to their jibes. The sorting room office is vast, the size of a small city block with an equally large population. Men sorting packets and parcels and bulk mail and letters, men running machines, men dividing the post into neighborhoods and streets ready for local delivery, men pushing York trolleys around the floor, men laughing, men shouting. On the north and west sides of the sorting room, 2 floors of offices rise above the main hall, their blackened windows overlooking the machines and the men and her. In all the time Jenny has worked in the sorting room, she has been upstairs only once, the day she was interviewed, tested, hired, and trained. As she works, she glances up at the windows from time to time and wonders if someone is behind the glass looking down. At the next frame, Roger works steadily, his gaze unwavering as though he's in a trance. There are 64 pigeonholes in his letter frame, and he knows the exact position of each one by heart. Jenny watches him out of the corner of her eyes. His hands barely move as letters fly one after another towards their final destinations. Behind the rows of letter frames at her back, the CFC, a machine as big as a house, drones through the day as it tumbles letters into place, turning them face out and cancelling their stamps before they are boxed and stacked and pushed into a line of York trolleys ready to be sorted by hand. Until the end of their late shift, when the machines are switched off and the letter frames are cleared, the sorting office is never still. Fans whir overhead, machines rumble and clatter. Yorks clunk together as they are wheeled into their rows. Somewhere nearby, a transistor is tuned to Radio 2, but the music is drowned out by the noise. When she has finished the last of the letters on her bench, Jenny picks up the beach postcard she has set to one side earlier in the morning, ready to toss it into the frame with the rest. Turning it over to check its destination, she finds the words "insufficient address" scrawled in the white space next to Isle of Wight. The name of the town and the postcard are missing. The name of the town and the postcode are missing. Its only destination now is the dead letter office at the far end of the sorting room. She scans the message quickly. Life is nothing without you in it. There we go.
Oh wow. Thank you so much, Loree. I was completely there in that workplace with you, seeing it and feeling it, and it's amazing to have that part of the story, because then everything leads from that moment, doesn't it, into the rest rest of the novella, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. But thank you all for those great readings. So what I think I'll do now is I'll launch straight into the Q&A. We'll give Loree a breather, and we're going to go back to Douglas and ask him some questions about his book. And then when I've spoken to all the writers, there'll be time for the audience to ask questions at the end as well. So guys, this is great, really good. Okay, so Douglas, you're back in the hot seat, okay? So yeah, it's really interesting in Blue Postcards, isn't it? There are 3 strands to your novella that intertwine beautifully. And I was really interested because one of the strands revolves around the artist Eve Klein. But I found when I read, certainly to me, art seemed to be everywhere in the story. And I wondered if you could please tell us some more about the importance of art in Blue Postcards.
Well, actually, when I was thinking about writing something, it was blue that I was really interested in. It was the starting point for me. And I had for years wanted to write something around blue. And then one day I was doing some research for a piece of writing, and I bumped into Eve Klein. And I thought he was just such a fabulous liar. And I don't mean that as any disparagement. I was fascinated by his self-promotional abilities. But what I'd really bumped into was a photograph that he'd taken called Into the Void. And in the photograph, it's a deserted, virtually deserted Paris street. And he has launched himself from the top of a building. And he published this in his own newspaper. And he claimed to have found a way to defy gravity. And the photograph is the most wonderful lie, because it is 2 photographs stuck together, one of the empty street and one of him leaping off this building. If you had seen just the photograph of him leaping off the building, then below him there was a group of men holding a canvas for him to land in. And he claimed he'd defied gravity. So his lies were really what drove the narrative for me, and his blue art too. The other art that's in the novel crept in without me really realizing it, to be honest.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? And yeah, I first came across Eve Klein when I saw a picture of the women he'd painted blue, and then they were rolling about on the paper, and
Yes.
it was very memorable, very interesting, because quite early conceptual art, isn't it? And like you say, fascinating character, and not shy of self-promotion or sort of events, sort of myth building as well in his work. It's amazing.
When he's jumping off the building, he's dressed in a suit and tie. I mean, he was a very dapper dresser, and that also flavours the novel. Yes,
because Henry that is the tailor, or Henri, I should call him. He's French. Well, that's not actually his name, is it? But I won't go into all of that. But his art and making the suits as well, and the care and attention, and this blue thread that he puts into the suits, it's amazing. Yeah, great. We could talk about that all night, but I'm just going to ask you just to sort of follow on from that, really, about this idea of lying, and you touched on it there with Eve Klein, and in fact in all the parts of all these 3 strands of the novella, there are lies that the characters tell. You refer to them as blue lies. You could probably, hopefully, tell us a bit more about that. But they tell them to themselves and they tell them to other people, almost. And I just wonder how this influences the narrative as you wrote it, Douglas.
Well, at the time of writing, I was both interested and absolutely appalled by the lies of prominent politicians. I don't need to name any names, and the scale of the lies that they were telling and what they were openly getting away with, I just couldn't believe. And then I started to examine Eve Klein's lies and what fiction really is, and that in a way became a part of Blue Postcards. The lies that are allowed, the lies that are a step too far. And you mentioned the blue lies. Blue lies are lies that are told for the benefit of the community. So telling children that Santa Claus exists, for example, might be considered a blue lie. And they're on a par with white lies. So the blue lies and the white lies that feature in the book against the black lies and against the lies you should not tell. And I'll not give away what the big lie is that you should not tell, but it comes near the end of the book. So I think I was exploring something of this in the various narratives, but not in a kind of didactic way. It just flowed into the narrative, really, probably because of my preoccupation with the lies that were being told publicly in politics.
No, that's really interesting, and I think it's interesting that the art of storytelling as well, that you mentioned that as well, the sort of making things up, but they can be very true as well, can't they, when we write fiction? So,
but also when they appear in fiction, we just believe them, and I think I'm at pains sometimes in the novella to tell you, listen, I'm lying here, but then I go on and tell it, and hopefully you're swept along into almost believing that it's true, even though I've told you it's a lie.
That's right. That's right. It's a wonderful book, everyone. I can only recommend reading it. And I must say, I've got blue as my favourite colour, and I have my blue top on in your honour today, Douglas. So there we go. Good excuse to get it out. And the last thing, final question that we've got time for tonight is, I just wanted to ask, how long did Blue Postcards take you to write?
So I'm pretty quick when I write, but I'm really bad company when I'm writing, because there is nothing else going on except the writing. This is an easy question. This is the easiest of the three questions. And it's easy because I actually kept a record of the writing process for Blue Postcards. It took 6 days, 6 concentrated days, where I wrote sometimes for up to 10 hours, where when I wasn't writing, I was thinking about it, where I was watching television, I wasn't really watching television, I was thinking about the novel, the characters were in my head. I don't plan, so I didn't know where this was going to go. I write like people read. I write to find out what's going to happen at the end. So that's what happened in 6 days.
I think that's so amazing, Douglas. It's such an inspiration, because my very small book, my novella, took me 6 years to write. So when I heard that, I thought, I'm insanely jealous, and I want, what's Douglas's secret? But you've explained it very well. And it's also just given me a really big stick to beat myself with it when I'm taking a really long time to write. So,
I'm so sorry.
and I don't know, I can't remember if it's George Simenon or one of those writers, and the process you described with that really intense writing, it reminds me of a writer on it, like I say, can't quite remember what his name was, but I think you're blessed. So, it's great. And like, it's something for me to aspire to in future. Thank you so much, Douglas. And I'm sure we'll be coming back to you at the end with some questions for the audience as well. Okay, so now I'm going to ask JT some questions. So JT, in Taking Flight, your wonderful novella, there's this fascinating and magical relationship between a grandmother and grandson, and the reading that you gave us was very much talking about this Nana character who's incredible. And when I was reading, I was really thinking about how the grandparents' displacement from Cuba to the US had affected all the intergenerational relationships within their family. And I wondered if you could just tell us a bit about that, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I approach it primarily through identity, like how a part of the dark humor, and sometimes it's not so dark, but what I try to play with in terms of the humor is how the characters come to understand themselves. And, that's largely a cultural and social question. And that also formed a lot of the interviewing and work that I did in preparing the novella. So when we determine, who we are and how we are, we often base our relationships with the world around us. And for the characters in Taking Flight, they're trying to do that with other characters who are largely imaginary, Nana's relationships in Cuba, the relationships she thinks she has here. And then as the primary relationship for the young narrator, that shapes the type of person he becomes. And, Taking Flight, I read from one section where the protagonist, the narrator, is a young child, but there are moments where the narrator is an adult. And so there's these questions about how this narrator comes to see himself, even though he has never been to Cuba. He himself is not a refugee or an immigrant, but takes on that identity because of the relationship that he had with Nana. So yeah, just throwing the question of identity up in the air and then trying to write stories about it and what that might mean for people.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I just sort of felt this kind of, there was a sort of, I don't know if it's just me, but there was a kind of sense of loss or something in that, and this bond that they had, and this sort of idea, you know, and the grandmother stays with the Tito even when he's in Alaska, and she appears to him very early in the book, and it just felt like such a powerful thing, but also that there was sort of bit of sadness there as well. So I just thought it was really, really interesting how something like that can affect the lives of families as they go on and change.
Yeah, thank you. And home, you just mentioned it. Home is also a really important aspect. You know, what does home mean? And in the story, right, what Tito and Nana, maybe not so much Nana, but what Tito is trying to struggle to realize, right, is how much of that home is based on a bond versus a place, right? And those tensions constantly follow him. Yes,
yeah, no, that's great. So I was also really intrigued by these notions of invisibility that recur throughout the book, and this I think the grandfather is talking about becoming, you know, he goes back to Cuba and it says he's become invisible, and also there's this idea of feigning illness to inspire love that Tito sort of learns almost from the grandma, but you can explain a lot better than I can, JT. I just wonder why ideas like this are important to the characters in the book.
Yeah, I really appreciate Douglas's answer to the writing process. Let me just say, because I often, that is the only way I know how to write. I write without really knowing where I'm going. I just have these impulses and feelings and ideas, and I just pursue them, and I don't know where they're necessarily going to take me. So the invisibility wasn't a conscious choice. You know, it wasn't something I thought, where, you know, it didn't show up in the excerpt that I just read, but the protagonist struggles with literally becoming invisible, right? He's disappearing. And as I started to emerge and I started to play with it, it was also around times when, you know, we here in America, we're talking about having immigrant children in cages, right? And how many people do not want to have that conversation, and how immigrants often live invisible lives, right? And when we're thinking about, you know, who are the people that we are we worth being seen? Am I worth being loved, right? Those questions started to become organically related as I was writing the book, and I just leaned into that conceit, or, you know, that device, and I just wanted to bring it up into the surface of it, where, yeah, quite literally, if you don't know who you are and you don't know what your home is, then do you even exist? And then I wanted to play with that, approaching it from humorous, magical realist angles.
Yeah, I think that works incredibly well, and yeah, no, it's just fascinating how many different aspects there are to all those ideas in their characters' lives. And there's also this absolutely wonderful scene I wanted to ask you about at the end of Taking Flight. And I suppose it really links to the name of your novella. Nana and Tito go to visit Gatorland, and you think obviously they're there to see the alligators, but no, they're there to see the birds, and they climb up or go near this tower and climb up and see all these amazing birds. And so I just wondered if you could just tell us a bit about the significance of birds. And obviously when you were reading, you told us about Pepe, this unfortunate pet that Nana had early on. So there are the birds, and there's sort of apparent freedom that they have at the end of Taking Flight, and what that means in your story.
Yeah, Nana is full of red herrings and distractions. So of course she would go to Gatorland, not for the gators, but for the birds. And birds play this strangely symbolic, again, you know, writing without really knowing where I'm going. Birds play the symbolic role in the story in terms of, again, what does it mean to be free, right? As an immigrant without a home, your life is movement. You're constantly moving around. You don't really have any real stability. So birds have started to emerge as the symbol of that relationship and of that self. What's really funny, I'm purposely, I hope it's okay, trying to avoid, you know, really telling you what I think birds mean in this story, but instead I'll tell you a fun fact about myself. I love animals deeply and passionately, but if there was an animal that I hate, it's birds, because of their ability to fly. we don't fly. I mean, they get to fly, they get to swim, they get to walk. It's like, pick one. We don't get to do any of that. I mean, we do. We can walk and swim, obviously, but not as well. And so there's a little bit of envy and jealousy there. So I'll give you that about myself. I chose this animal to have this prominent symbol in my story when it's the animal that I least like in the world.
Well, the joys of the subconscious, isn't it, JT? I mean, it's just like, well, you write and all this stuff comes out. Who knows? But I think you've done an amazing, created an amazing work here with all those really interesting ideas. And thank you very much for telling us more about your book.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and no doubt, I'm sure people will have questions for JT later on as well. So I'm just going to move on to Debbi now, and Debbi has written a novella in Flash, which is, I suppose, slightly different from some of the other novellas, and we're going to talk about that in the questions. But first of all, Debbi, I just wanted to ask you a bit about the character of Frank in your novella, All About Love, because I understand that Frank is based on a real person, and I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges that writers face when they're writing characters who are based on real people? I wondered if you could tell us a bit about that, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, Frank is based on a real person. I said earlier that I discovered I had a lot of flashes about my father when he was ill. So that kind of, when I decided to write the novella in Flash and put all these flash fictions together, I did base it on my father and on my life, but it's very much fictionalized. And I think the problems that you do face when you're writing about something that is based in fact is that you obviously you risk upsetting people, not in any kind of malicious way, but just in the fact that you may evoke memories in people that you're connected to. So when I'm writing about these stories that I base in fact, people who know me, people in my family might say, oh yeah, I remember that. And, they may remember it differently because, of course, we all have different memories from our childhood. Things that we believe are fact are just something that we thought was fact when we were 8. So it could be absolutely nothing to do with truth. So, the only thing you can do when writing something based on fact, and most fiction is based on fact, there's always some part of us, there's always some truth in there, no matter what the story is that you're writing. The main thing to do is just to, you have that sort of caveat, don't you, where you do the disclaimer in the book, because, your memories may differ. You just change people's names, change the family. It's based on my family, but the family is different in this book. I have 2 brothers. I kind of combined 2 brothers into one for the purposes of the book, just so that it would be different from my life. But there is a lot of truth in there. You just have to be careful that you don't upset people. That's the main thing, I think.
Yes, I mean, it's hard, isn't it? I think it's a very hard thing, but I think you've coped very, very well with it. And
I hope so.
I would always say that fiction, when it becomes fiction, because it's never everything, you were just telling a little bit, it's never the sort of the whole truth of what happened, is it?
Yeah, because you have to make some fictional elements, because I'm always teaching in my classes, it's all very well writing from your own experiences, but if you always do that, you'll only have a finite number of stories, whereas if you just use the emotions that you felt in certain situations, you can have 1,000, 1,000,000 stories, because you just put yourself in that position and use that emotion. So it's always good to work from experience, but you cannot always write about facts all the time.
No, and I think that's where creativity comes in, isn't it? It's transformational. So it can take experience and change it into something completely different. So thanks, Debbi. That's answered that really well. I was also intrigued. I'm glad Liz came up in your readings, because Frank's wife Liz is a fascinating character, and she's got a real strength of character that comes through in the book. And I just wondered if you could tell us about where you think Liz's ability to cope with these very difficult circumstances that she faces in her life come from.
Yeah, I mean, again, I suppose the person I had in mind when I was writing Liz's character is my mother. And I think I mentioned at the beginning that Liz has a faith in God. And I think that's what carries her through, because, if a certain generation, my parents' generation, people, especially religious people, marry for life. They take those vows in church and they stick by those vows. I mean, people, you know, get divorced at the drop of a hat these days, and, you know, to some degree, you know, you can understand why, but in other ways, is that the way to go? People don't work at relationships now. And I think that my parents' generation, which the generation of Frank and Liz are my parents' generation, they took seriously the vows that they made. We may not agree with them. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I certainly agree with the sentiments of the vows, even if I don't agree with, you know, this patriarchal idea of marriage now, where the woman has, you know, you do these vows. But this generation, I think the strength comes from that, from religion, from tradition, and you know, that I think that's where Liz came from. Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? If you're writing characters based on your, say, on your parents, but they're always a mystery to you when you're a child as well, aren't they? So it's interesting what comes through when you begin to write about them. You sort of,
yeah, because I said to my family, you know, that some of these chapters are based on things that maybe I thought I remembered from as a child, but like I said, just, you know, your memories are just your memories.
That's
and
right.
They are just your perception of what happened at the time. And it's great to say that this is a fiction book, because then I can, you know, I can get away with all the inaccuracies, and there probably are many inaccuracies from my memories, but I also expanded them because a lot of the scenes that happen in the book are totally made up and fabricated, but it was just to carry on the novella, you know, on the way through, really.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. No, thank you, Debbi. So we've just touched on this as well, that your novella is made up of pieces of flash fiction. And some of those have been obviously published as standalone pieces, and some of the publications you mentioned. Well, when I read your bio. So I just wondered if you could talk about how a novella in flash would differ from other novellas, really, and written in a slightly different style.
Yeah, I'd never heard of a novella in flash until about 3 or 4 years ago, when there was a competition, it's a Bath Novella and Flash Award, and I started thinking about it. And it's, as you say, a few of these chapters have been published as standalone flashes. So the difference with a novella in flash and a novella is that you could pick a chapter or 2 chapters from this novella and read them alone, and they would be complete stories and would have a satisfactory ending. But the difference with the novella in flash is that if you read them in the order that I place them in the novella, then you would have a story arc that would make sense throughout the book. So I think that's the difference, really. I mean, it's just that you can, you know, each story is standalone, but it does form part of the whole. And but I think it's getting more recognised now than novella and flash. There are lots of competitions, lots of people recognising them, and people are switching onto it a little bit. And you can sort of, in some ways, you can kind of cheat, because in a normal novel or novella, the chapters have to have some logical progression throughout. But with a novella and flash, they can almost float around each other. They don't have to be linear. They don't have to make any sense, really. And as long as you get the whole picture of the story across from beginning to end.
Yes, it's almost like they're being fragmented, isn't it? Or little, like flash is a good word, because it's little flashes of light, and then looking from different angles, and then but it joins up to make it.
Yeah, I think I described it as snapshots of a life. So it's just memories of different people at different times, which make up the whole of this character.
No, that's brilliant. No, thanks so much, Debbi. That's really.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And now we're going to turn to Loree, and I'm going to ask some questions about your wonderful book, Loree. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was, in Missing Words, there's the main character Jenny, and you were talking about her life and these rather sort of stifling conditions that she's got at work in the sorting office, and also, you know, in the book, when she goes home, it's sort of a very sort of grief-stricken household she's in, and it's quite sort of stifling. But I found it contrasted really brilliantly with this sense of freedom she gets when she goes to the Isle of Wight. She takes her bicycle and she cycles around trying to deliver this postcard that had the insufficient address on it. And I just wondered what inspired you to write Jenny's journey. in the way that you did?
Well, I suppose, yeah, there's several things here. So I'm a cyclist, so riding a bike is normal to me. And I think going back to the time in which the story is set, there were, fewer cars on the road. There were households at the time that, still didn't have a car. Now we think of, families that, might have 2 or even 3 cars in one household. And that wasn't, the case during the time that this was set. I worked at Royal Mail in the sorting office for a brief period of time. I started as a Christmas temp, and then decided, I actually kind of like this, and so I stayed on. I only stayed for about a year, because at the time I was working maybe a year or 2, and then I would quit my job and go off cycling someplace. And so I was only there probably, I don't know, a year or 18 months, but I really enjoyed it at the time. And I found that the work itself, the physical work of sorting mail, I found really quite, it didn't require a lot of brain power. You had to know where you were throwing the letters to, but once you had memorized the frame, you could basically, spend the evening working and thinking. And I guess the initial inspiration really came from, my own experience of, looking at postcards of other people's holidays. And then also every now and then there would be a letter with an incomplete address, which would be sent to the dead letter office. And I kind of just, started thinking about these two things in combination. And, at the time, there wasn't a lot of, people still wrote proper letters at the time. And so I knew that some of the letters that I was dealing with contained really important messages. And, I started thinking, well, what about, if they had an incorrect address, what would happen to these letters? And they would get sent to the dead letter office. And then they would, there would be somebody there, apparently, who, would go through the electoral rolls and so forth to try and locate the correct address. And I'm starting to put an idea together for a story, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that's not much of a story that you've got, some guy in a dead letter office, leafing through pages of the electoral roll. And so I put a time limit on it. So the message in the postcard needs to be the sender of the postcard, who is in Australia, needs to have an answer by the end of the month. And Jenny knows that if she sends the postcard to the dead letter office, it's not going to get there in time. And so it was, kind of a combination of all of those things that were the initial idea.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Loree. I think the dead letter office just sounds so awful. It's like, I can imagine if you're working, you just don't want any of your pieces to go there, do you? No. But I think it's interesting, there's so many themes across the novellas that tie in, and it's lovely to find another postcard in your book, as well as in Douglas's book, are obviously very important. And I guess postcards are very open. that they can be read, unlike a letter which would be sealed and there would be no way of. So it's really interesting that you had that sort of, you know, I guess it's intriguing, isn't it? Intriguing about these letters that might not get there on time, and it sets up the story beautifully. So basically, the next question I had for you was about this element of cycling, which you touched on there, because I can't remember the last time I read a book in which the character cycled everywhere, and I found it fascinating, and the sort of physical action of it, and especially when she gets to the Isle of Wight and starts going all over the landscape on this bicycle, very different from walking or driving. And I just wondered why cycling was so important, why you thought it was so important to your character.
So I'm a cyclist. I don't have a car. I choose not to have a car, and I not only commute by bicycle, but I've done a lot of cycle touring around the world since I was about 16, and so cycling is a really important part of my life, and because of the sense of freedom that it gives a person. So I'm free of filling my car with petrol every week. I'm free of looking at bus schedules. I'm free of, getting MOTs and, all of the things that are have to do with owning a car. And the sense that I get when I'm traveling by bicycle as opposed to commuting is really one of freedom. And that was the idea that I wanted Jenny to feel. I wanted her to feel that sense of freedom. And she's moving under her own steam. She's not dependent upon anyone else. And so that's partly why the bicycle features so much. It is escapism. She's escaping her life, and she's going into this kind of world of adventure. I'm looking out my window at the island right now, and it is very much that sense that I wanted to be able to convey to the reader, that the bicycle is a form of liberation, and that there are adventures to be had even right here on our doorstep. Just get on a bike and go, and you'll see all sorts of things that you never would have thought you would encounter.
Yeah, no, that's great, Loree. Thank you. I've really got that idea of the sense of freedom from reading, and just the sort of way she experienced the landscape and the physical aspect of it through cycling. It was great. And so finally, I just wanted to ask, I really enjoyed the fact that Missing Words was set in a very recognisable period of history, and that was the 1980s. And things like the miners' strike were mentioned, and Mrs. Thatcher's prime ministership. And I just wondered, and again, you touched on it briefly, but why you set your novella in this particular time period?
Yeah, so it's set during August of 1984. So there was a lot going on at that time. Of course, there was Mrs. Thatcher, and she was 5 years into her prime ministership at the time, as the first female prime minister. And she incited a lot of it was a very complex time politically, I think, that where the urge is to think, a woman prime minister at last, and then of course it turns out that actually she didn't always exhibit many female characteristics, and I think that she was quite divisive in a lot of ways. And so, you know, there was a lot of political excitement at the time on both sides. And you know, we also had, you know, the miners' strikes. So, you know, in the way she dealt with the miners' strikes was very heavy-handed and very aggressive. And those miners' strikes went on and on and on, and they dragged on for, you know, months and months and months. As well, during this time, we have, you know, the women encamped at Greenham Common. And so it, you know, again, there's this kind of this sense that, you know, women are being empowered, but women are also being disempowered. And so I was interested in that also in the workplace, that, you know, this was still, I mean, it doesn't seem very long ago, but you know, we have made huge leaps as far as, you know, women in the workforce. There, you know, there are, you know, probably, I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that there are much greater numbers of women in the post office, for instance. And so I kind of use that political backdrop as, you know, almost reflecting the life that Jenny was experiencing herself. So, you know, with the unions in the post office wanting to fight their cause, and Mrs. Thatcher wanting to kind of quell union activity at the time. So that was part of it. The big reason that it is set in 1984 was it had to be set during a time when communication was less easy than it is today. And, you know, I can remember when I first came here from the States, I could only phone home once or twice a year from a phone box on the corner. And, you know, I used to phone home at Thanksgiving, when I knew that most of my family would be gathered round with a, you know, a pocket full of coins. And so I knew that, you know, the postcard was going to be, you know, a very important way to communicate this message, and that you know, there couldn't be any chance of emails or cheap phone calls between the two people on either side of that postcard.
Yeah, no, I remember those times very well. And, you know, letters were so important, weren't they? And yeah, and Jenny's sense of being alone as a woman in that workplace particularly was very strong, and sort of came across really, really well. Well, guys, I just think that's great. It's so wonderful to hear you all talk about your books. I am just going to check in with Danny and Louise now, because I've got some questions I can ask everyone now, sort of like common themes in your books that go across all of them, or we can take some questions from the audience. I'm not sure how we're doing for time. So what do you think, Danny? Is Danny there anywhere?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma, and everybody, for your readings and your eloquent questions and answers. I think if anybody has any burning questions, pop them in the chat, and perhaps while we wait for some to appear, perhaps you can ask your first few questions, Emma, and then we have
sure.
then we can answer the audience questions as well. But yeah, if everybody's okay to stick around until about 8:30, then I think go with that.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. I haven't been able to keep an eye on everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, I mean, we've touched on it a bit, and it's been lovely, so lovely to everyone reading and talking about their books. But I really noticed when I was reading all the novellas that they share this common theme of love between them. They share other themes and other, you know, they have lots of resonances with each other. But it really struck me that they've got this common theme of love running through them all. One of my favourite subjects. All different kinds of love. There's romantic love, platonic love, familial love, a love of work, and many more. And I just wondered if the authors now would be able to tell us a bit about the importance of love in their books, please. Who wants to start? Shall I pick on someone?
Yes.
Is that Douglas? Is that JT? Thank you, JT.
Yeah, I can go first.
Thank you.
So typically, you know, love is often presented, not so much in literary text, but, you know, just in stories that we tell of love, it's very romanticized as this absolutely positive thing in that humans experience. And as you mentioned in your question to me, Emma, earlier, I try to play with the notion of love that is self-destructive, is dangerous, right? As you read in Taking Flight, there's an association between mental illness and the love that is imagined that people should feel for one another. Love is this harmful obligation sometimes. So I try to really play with the ways love can be painful, right? To just look at and explore a more robust, complicated emotional experience that often falls onto this typically simplified word.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, I think. And yeah, you're right. You know, modern life and fiction particularly, sometimes it does just focus on that very romantic sort of love. And I thought it was great to see so much nuance in all the books. And none of them shy away from difficulty or complexity or, you know, like you say, these what can be quite damaging and difficult aspects of love. And yet we can still love the people who have this sort of, you know, effect on us, and we know that we'll always love them, but it's just a very complex experience, isn't it? And I think all the books address that. It was great to see. Thank you very much. JT, is there anyone else who would like to?
Yeah, I would like to say, with my novella in Flash, it talks about familial love, and you know, we tend to think that love for your family should be unconditional, and very often it is. But there's so many conditions applied to family love, and I think what I was hoping to achieve in the novella was that despite all the things that stand in the way of loving your family, that love does overcome everything, you know. And it's not true for every family, I understand that, but I just hope that with Only About Love, it came across that the love for, you know, siblings and fathers and daughters and mothers and everything came, you know, was just overcame every obstacle, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting in all the books. It talks about how love changes through time.
Yes.
And how you come to realize different things about these relationships and the people that you love through time. And you know, thinking of Douglas's book as well, looking back and thinking about something that happened in the past and what it might have meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so fascinating. Loree or Douglas, would you like to add anything?
Well,
go ahead, Douglas.
sorry. When I was thinking about this question, because we've got questions obviously before, I wasn't sure that there was a love story in my novel, in that it's a non-event. It's a memory of a love that never happened, but the narrator decides in the process of writing this novella to write it how he would have liked it, except he's now an old man and he's remembering this young person that he'd never really connected with, but would like to have connected with. And so there's something almost improper about the connection now, because he's still remembering her as young, but he's now much older. So it's a kind of, and he keeps telling you, as I said already, he keeps telling you, I'm just making this up. This never happened. This is a lie. This is one of the lies. But he wants it to somehow have some truth to it. And I think when you're reading it, you want some truth in it as well. And so I think it's a kind of yearning rather than a love story.
Yeah, I think by writing about it and creating it, maybe you create it. I don't know. I mean, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's what that particular strand of the novel, what he wanted to tell us about. So I think that's interesting in itself, really. And I think, yeah, no, it's just so fascinating. I would hope that, you know, we could call that a bit of a love story as well. So yeah, thank you, Douglas. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Loree, what about the role of love in your book? Would you?
Yeah, I liked what Debbi said earlier, that, you know, when she was talking about how, you know, during our parents' generation, that you know, people stayed married who most likely wouldn't stay married today. And you know, those times were different, and that people took those vows much more seriously. Although, you know, I think people do take it seriously, but I think that there is maybe a difference in expectations. And I think Jenny, my character, is kind of in the middle of those two generations, where you know, people will stay together regardless, or start a new life. And so she's kind of on that cusp of you know, she's reaching that age where she thinks, you know, she's still young enough, she could start again. You know, she's you know, the marriage is having difficulties, but what she doesn't, you know, when she goes to the island, that gives her the time to think, you know, so she's no longer bogged down with, you know, the daily responsibilities, and it gives her that ability just to think about what she needs to think about, and which is her relationships with her family. And anyway, yes, so the ending is perhaps a little bit open-ended. People have kind of interpreted it in different ways, so I think that's maybe a good thing. But, you know, in my mind, I think she goes home and tries again to work things out. And that, you know, with the cycling, it's all about perseverance. You keep pedaling, you keep going, and eventually you get to where you want to be. And I think that's what she's doing.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And like you say, it was that period of, you know, changes in women's lives so much, you know, and that was, you know, a very interesting time, wasn't it, in so many ways. No, thank you all so much. That's been brilliant to hear you all speak about that. So Danny, that's probably time to wrap up now, is it? Or is there anyone got any questions? I can't see anything coming up on the screen, so I don't know if...
I think that's all really. I think we'll end it there, but thank you all for sticking around for a little bit longer. I know we've overran, but hopefully it was worth it. Just finally, before we go, I mentioned at the beginning that by attending tonight, you are entered into a prize draw, and I have chosen somebody randomly. So drum roll, I can announce that the winner of the 4 Fairlight Moderns that we've talked about today is Amanda Huggins. So I'm going to send you an email. Congratulations. I'll send you an email probably on Monday morning, and we can send those books across to you. But thank you everybody so much for coming. Thank you so much to all of the authors, and thanks to Emma for being a wonderful, very eloquent chair. And in case you missed at the beginning, she also is one of the authors in the Fairlight Moderns collection, and her novellas called Travelling in the Dark, if you wanted to also check that out as well. But yes, thank you all for coming, and yeah, I hope you had a lovely evening.
Thank you very much. It was amazing tonight. Round of applause for Emma.
Oh no, you guys.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Stars of the show. Great achievements, guys. Well done. Amazing, amazing lot of books, and
And
I
congratulations.
feel really lucky to have read them and been able to speak to you all.
And just for me as well, just to say thank you so much, Emma. Wonderful authors. Lovely, lovely to hear you speak. And thank you so much, Emma. You've just done a wonderful job this evening.
Thank you, Louise and Daniela. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.